Thank you so much. I'm going to start a screen share for those of you who are watching online. You'll be able to see the presentation, and I will send you all a copy so that for those of you who are on the phone, you'll be able to reference it later. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of the church. So I thank you all so much for inviting me to be a part of this project that you are beginning. It is a very worthwhile journey that you are about to take, because many of our churches did not get into the position that they're in today overnight. So we would be foolish to think that we will be able to get out of these positions overnight. It is a process, and a big part of that process is going to be a mindset shift. So not only do we have to understand where we are today, but we also have to contextualize that to understand how did we get here, so that as we're working with our members and especially our leadership team, we can help them to understand the changes that need to be made so that we do have ministries that are attractive to the current generation as well as future generations. The basis of my work comes from the Great Commission. In 2016, the World Methodist Conference, can't remember the exact name, but the World Methodist Conference was meeting in the United States for the first time in like 20, and they invited me to do a presentation on using technology for evangelism. And speaking before an international audience, I really had to stretch myself to think, what is it that I can say that not only speaks to the people who are in the United States, that speaks to people globally? And I was led to the Great Commission. This is the first time in the history of our civilization that we honestly have the opportunity to fulfill the Great Commission. No longer is that opportunity only available to people who can raise the money to go to other countries, buy passports, get visas, take time off to travel. Now, with a few strokes of our keyboard, we can share the gospel with all nations. So our ministries are no longer confined to just the people within our neighborhoods or the people who come to our services on Sunday mornings. Now our ministries have the ability to reach people across the globe. So what does that mean? That is going to change some of the approaches that we have to make, because as we're streaming and putting content out, we can't control who is receiving that content. And so if people who are outside of our community say, hey, I want to join your ministry, what does that mean? What does that look like? We can't turn them away and say, oh, I only minister to the people in Tuscaloosa, or we only minister to the people in Tuskegee. We don't want to turn people away from the gospel. So that's been the basis of this digital discipleship work. When the pandemic hit, all of the churches who had been resisting this digital evolution, who have been saying, we don't need to be online. It doesn't take all that. I need to see people in person. I need to put my hands on them. I need to touch them. God showed them that, no, you don't need to do all of that. And just to be transparent, I've even told people, if that is your attitude toward ministry, that people have to come to you, that you have to see them, that they have to only do church the way you want them to do church, is that your ego speaking? Or is that truly the way that you envision church? And sometimes it's our desire to see a full church. It's our desire to see people that want them to come into our congregations. It's not because we're truly trying to save them, but because we're trying to aggregate numbers. We're trying to fill up.
But she know the pastors.
So that's one of the things that, we really have to think about as we're doing this work. The trends that we have been dealing with, and these are not just pandemic trends, but these are trends that we have been seeing in our communities for at least the past 10 years. But again, being in space allowed us to ignore some of these trends, because even though we saw our memberships dwindling from 100 to 90 to 80 to 70 to 60, because we still had some people, we were able to ignore these trends. But now a lot of us have no other choice but to really take a look at how is church changing, and what changes do we need to make, as my grandfather's favorite song, A Charge to Keep, says, to serve the present age. Because the message of the gospel doesn't change, but how we relate the gospel to those that we are witnessing to has to be relevant to them. Just because it's the way that you became acclimated to church or the way you grew up in church does not mean that that's going to be appealing to the next generation. I have a 15-year-old son, and so I'm always hearing, and I give him space to criticize, because when he tells me what he doesn't like, it helps me to see what needs to be fixed. And too often we want to ignore these trends because we don't want to do the hard work of making the adjustments. So one of the first trends that we've seen is an increase in bivocational ministry. So what a lot of people think when they hear that is, oh, the pastor needs to get a second job. But it's not always about the pastor having a second job, but the pastor having a calling upon his life to do something other than just preach and pastor. So you have more pastors who are writing books, who are speaking, who are lecturing, who are using their spiritual gifts in other spaces. And so that is calling for church leadership to have to step up. One of the old models of church was the church was centered around the pastor. Everything started and ended with the pastor. Oh, if it's a problem, take it to the pastor. If there's an issue, take it to the pastor. And what that has led to is a lot of burnout among pastors because they feel like they have to do everything. A lot of members who are not fulfilling their personal calling that God has placed on their life because they're leaving it to the pastor to do. And so you have church structures that are very much focused on the top, whereas the rest of the membership feel like they have no obligation to the work of ministry. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. We're also seeing open dialogue about sensitive issues. In the past, there were certain things that we just didn't talk about, especially in Black church. We don't talk about that. Just pray about it. But this generation that's coming through, not just young people, but even some older people who are having an awakening, they want to talk about these issues. They want you to place social issues in a theological context. They don't want you to just say, just pray about it. They want to know, what does God say about this? What does scripture say about this? Not your opinion, not what you think, not how you feel, but what does God have to say about the times that we're living in? And if the church cannot answer those questions, it's not that people are church hopping or that they're fickle. They're searching. They're searching for a place where they can find answers. They're not searching for Zumba. They're not searching for game night. They're not searching for chicken plates. They are searching for God. And too often our churches are providing everything but that. So how are we having conversation, dialogue around these sensitive issues? Whether it's generational trauma, molestation, adultery, a plethora of sins that we don't talk about because we know that it's going to offend and step on some toes of some members. But the longer we allow them to go unaddressed, the more people we turn off and we lose. We also have to look at blended families and communities. No longer is the family just husband, wife, and the children that they had, and then the other children are somewhere off hidden. Families are blended now. You have people who are divorced and remarrying, and they have stepchildren. You have interracial marriages. You have communities that are changing. Families are blended, and they're trying to figure out, how do we work through these issues? Because with that comes some tough conversations. Theologically, how do we help them to understand those issues? How do we help them to address these issues? And then there's an increased access to information. So again, looking back to the founding of the church, typically the pastor and maybe the Sunday school teacher who was an educator were the ones who could read the Bible. So that's why we did a lot of reading out loud, because a lot of the congregation was illiterate. Well, now when you're teaching, whether it's Bible study, Sunday school, or your worship service, people are on the phone Googling what you're saying. Does that sound right? What are commentators saying about that? So there's an increased access to information, which means that we have to be even more diligent about studying and understanding scripture and being able to wrestle with scripture with people. Sometimes you don't know the answer. Sometimes it is a wrestle. Well, this is what I see. Well, this is what God is saying to me. And your interpretation may not be my interpretation, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong, because scripture speaks to each of us differently. That's the joy in reading scripture and interpretation. 5 of us could preach the same text and have a different interpretation of it, because we're interpreting scripture through our own lens. But too often we're not teaching people how to read and interpret scripture, how to hear from God through what they're reading and learning. And then we have sharing of content. In the past 10 years, as social media has become more popular, you'll see before we were streaming, even if you weren't streaming, people were in your congregation going live. They were still posting your content. People were tweeting different snippets from your sermons. People were posting on social media what you were saying. So again, that makes it even more important that we do the work to ensure that whether we're teaching, whether we're doing mission work, whatever we're doing it for the glory of God, because when other people are looking at it, that's what they're going to ask. Is this a God-centered work, or is this just them trying to make themselves feel better? So those are some of the changes. If you think back to the way, church was 50 years ago to where we are now, you'll see that these are 5 of the biggest changes, 5 of the biggest shifts that are happening within our congregations. And so it's up to us to think about, how do we navigate these trends? Next, we want to think about location, the distance that current members live from their place of worship. Previously, when a lot of our churches were founded, it was the people within the community who were attending that church. But now we have people who are driving, when we were in location, who are driving 20, 30 minutes to get to church. But then going to the second point, the relationship that the church has with the existing community has in a lot of instances dwindled. The community does not feel ownership of the church. They don't feel connection with the church. The church is that other place over there. I've talked to churches and I say, okay, so when you go, door knocking, when you go talk to the people in the community, what do you say? Most common thing that I get, we invite them to come to revival. We invite them to come to Bible study. And I always tell them they're not coming, because what you're doing is you're asking unchurched people to do church activity. When you attempt to evangelize your community, it has to be from a place of service. Knocking on doors and say, what does the community need? How can the church be of service to you? When you approach people in service, and you come back to them and say, hey, we knocked on, 3 blocks of doors, these are 5 programs that we found that you all need, and these are the things that we're planning to offer to help meet those needs. Then the community feels that you not only heard them, but you're willing to take action. Too often we ask the questions and we get the answers, but we don't take any action. It's a frivolous exercise. And people take note of that. They're like, they asked me 2 years ago that same question and nothing changed. If we're truly going to evangelize the community, it has to be providing the programs that they need. A lot of times we offer programs and we're like, the people didn't show up, the people don't care. It's not that they didn't care, but are you fulfilling a need that they have? Or are you putting together a project that makes you feel good, that you want to do, but does not feel a need that they actually have? And then we have to look at the changing demographics of our communities. That's not only, racial changes, but also the age demographic. So you can still have a predominantly Black community surrounding your church, but are they older people or are they younger people? Because the people who were once young are now getting older. So do your ministry speak to the issues that the people who are actually in your community have in this present age? Not who they were 20 years ago, not who they were 10 years ago, but where they are today. And then finally, looking at digital members, people who will never come into your physical space. How do we make them feel included and make them feel as though they are a part of the ministry? And then we find ourselves ministering in the midst of a pandemic. I don't think any of us could have imagined that we would be in this space for a year and counting. And it has created some changes in the way we minister. The first thing is looking at attendance versus views. So I know a lot of people, they get excited because they're like, I posted my, church service on Facebook and we had 600 views. Well, you have to think about, how does Facebook count views? Because just because someone views for 2 or 3 minutes does not mean they actually attended. They could have dropped in, listened for a few minutes, and kept scrolling. And that may count as a view, but that's not attendance. That's not providing us with an opportunity for discipleship. And we're going to talk about some strategies for that in a few minutes. I'm also looking at engagement in ministry work. A lot of the workers in our church feel as though they don't have a space to do ministry right now. Who are we talking about? Our ushers. Have we given thought to what role can they play in this digital environment? Looking at our culinary and our hospitality staff, have we given thought to what role can they play in this space? So one of the churches that I work with, we were talking about ushers. And so we came up with training ushers to be your digital engagement specialists. So just like they would have manned the door of the church, now they man the chat box during the virtual service. So that way they're still fulfilling that desire to welcome and to engage with people as they come in and to make them feel welcome. But now we're transitioning that skill set into a digital space. But too often we forget about those people. We forget about the people who, may be in charge of cooking the food. So how do we transition that to our food ministry? So looking at, the calling that everyone has for their personal ministry, and how do we use this digital space where we are today to keep them engaged in ministry work and to not have them feel like, there's no space for me here. There's nothing for me to do, because there's something for everyone to do. And then grief. Grief is, so I saw two of my pastoral friends yesterday post that they've lost 5 members in each of their congregations within the past 2 weeks. I think Reverend Tracy Blackman stated, and I can't forget this, but we were on a panel together, and she said, a lot of us think that when we go back to our church, it's going to look like Easter Sunday, but it may feel more like Good Friday. We're thinking that it's going to be this celebratory moment. But when you walk it back into your church and you see that there are 5, 10, maybe even 20 members who are missing, where you can look out and you see where they used to sit and they're no longer here anymore. Typically, we deal with loss gradually. One person is gone and we're able to adjust. But when you go back and you see that there are groups of people who are missing from our midst, we have to have something in place to help our congregations deal with that. We always say you can have God and a therapist. So that may be bringing in grief counselors to talk to people. How do we process loss theologically? Because some people are going to say, well, why did they take my family member, but they didn't take yours? Those are the questions that people have. And very rarely does the church make space to answer those questions. We're great for the repast. We're going to bring you some fried chicken and some soda, but after, when the questions start to set in and we wonder why attendance drops off after the loss of a spouse or a parent, and it's because people are wrestling theologically with, why me? I've been faithful. I pay my tithes. I serve. Why did God take my husband? Why did God take my child? And we don't do a very good job of providing space to answer that. And that is going to be a huge ministry need going forward. And then finally, pastoral care. We have to ensure that our pastors and our leadership are taking care of themselves so that they can take care of the flock. Because when you're burnt out, when you're not centered, when you're not in a good space, it's hard to minister. Because the thing that ministry requires more than anything else is grace. You have to be able to give grace to other people, because they are going to hurt you. They're going to talk about you. They're going to stab you in the back. They're going to do everything possible. The very people that you're trying to help, that you're trying to save, are going to be the people who are going to treat you the worst. I can guarantee you that. And if you're not in a good space, you can't deal with that, because then you start to take it personally. And that's why it's important for us to be in a good space. So when those arrows come, when the darts come, when all the foul stuff comes, we're in a good space and we recognize it's not about me. Hurt people hurt people. but we're in the business of healing people so that they can help people. But we can't do that work if we're not healed. So it's important for everyone who's a part of the leadership of a church to make sure that you are taking care of yourself so then you can help others. And then we look at the future of the church. What is this hybrid engagement going to look like? So understanding, who's going to come back. There are some people who are not going to come back for health reasons. There's some people who might not come back because they're caring for elderly parents, elderly spouse, people who are homebound. There are a plethora of reasons why people don't come to church. And even pre-pandemic, I challenged churches to stop thinking that people don't come to church just because they're lazy. People have a whole lot of stuff going on in their lives today. And at one point, Sunday was sacred and people didn't have stuff on Sundays, but now Sunday is just another day to the world. And so people have other things that they're engaged in. So we have to understand who's planning on coming back. And for those people who are not planning on coming back, how do we continue to engage them? It's always been fascinating to me because I look at T.D. Jakes' ministry and Joel Osteen's ministry, and they have thousands of people engaged in their ministries who have never stepped foot in the state of Texas. But you cannot tell those people that they are not members of these ministries because they did the work of figuring out how do we continue to engage them. Well, that's continuing to offer the streaming of the worship services, continuing to offering an online Bible study, continuing to provide those services for the people who choose or who just may not be able to come back. And then, of course, looking at the purpose of our buildings. So if you don't have a full church, what are some alternative uses for that space? If you have a lot of seniors in your community, could you open up the church during the week for, seniors to come and have lunch, seniors to come and have game day? If you have educational space, does your community need a child care center, after school services? There are a plethora of uses that we can have for our buildings that will meet the needs of the community around us. So as we look at digital discipleship, a lot of people are like, well, what does that mean? And for me, digital discipleship is taking the step beyond streaming and putting out content to how do we use technology to actually disciple. This chart was like the biggest revelation I think I've had in my ministry, because I always wondered, because we always say, we're going to go and make disciples, and that sounds great. However, what does that really mean? When someone joins your church, do you have any measure of determining where they are in the discipleship process? A lot of times we say, well, she came from, this other AME church, and she was a member there for 20 years and served in all these positions. But was she discipled? Because you can serve for 20 years, you can be the chairman of every committee in the church and still not be a disciple. Many of our churches, if we're honest, are filled with volunteers serving a nonprofit to fundraise. They're not filled with people who have truly become disciples of Christ. And how do I know this? Because many of you have to prod, poke, and almost push people to show up to do ministry. When you truly have God in your heart, you want to serve, not because the pastor called you to, not because it's the appointment that you got, not because of a title that you have, but you want to serve because you want to serve God. So when we look at discipleship, this is from the research from the UMC church, people typically fall into one of 5 categories. We have people who are searching. They're searching for something more. They're trying to figure it out. And if you're like me, you can remember when you were searching. You're trying to figure out who is God. Didn't know what the Trinity was. You thought it was like 3 separate things, not recognized it was one. You had a lot of questions. You were searching for answers. And then you started to explore, like, okay, like I'm kind of getting this, and you guys are going to get a copy of this chart in your presentation. And that's when you start to attend church sporadically. You start to engage sporadically, but you're still not committed because you're exploring, you're trying to figure this out. And then as you start to get answers, you begin to become more committed. You're still not fully committed. You're still not engaged all the time, but you're more committed. And then you start to grow in your faith. And as you read through some of these markers, I advise leaders to go through this not only with their personal walk, but also with the people that are serving under you. Because as you grow, then you become a mature disciple. And why this is important is because, one, when people join our church, we don't often have a means of assessing where they are in discipleship. So we either assume that everyone comes in at the very beginning and we take them from, the very beginning information to finish, whereas some people may not have been in church, but they've been spiritual. And we like to say, well, if you could be spiritual, but if you weren't in church, they don't want to hear that, because to them, they've been reading their Bible. They just haven't been in a formal structure, but they have the markers of a beginning or a growing disciple. People who are searching, a lot of times people join the church and our first thing is we got to put them to work. Well, if I'm still searching and exploring and trying to figure this out, and you're trying to put me to work, I'm not ready to work. I need to get some bearing under me. I need a foundation so that as I'm doing the work, I'm doing it for the glory of God and not just out of obligation. And so understanding this chart helps us to understand when we're doing ministry, when we're looking at how we're engaging with people, even online. Are you creating content for people who are searching? Are you creating content that's helping people to answer questions about the call or the tug that they're feeling? A lot of times we call these people church hoppers. They're not church hoppers. They're searching for something. And they're going from church to church trying to figure out, where does my soul find peace? Where do I get the answers to what I'm looking for? And too often we don't follow up with them. They might have come, we don't ever call to say, hey, you came to church, did you have any questions? Is there anything that, we can share with you? In the exploring phase, I always like to ask, what translation of the Bible are you reading? Some people got a Bible from their grandparents, King James Version. They don't understand what thou art thee means. So they're exploring, they're trying to figure this thing out. They open the Bible and it's gibberish to them. Do we ask, what translation are you reading? Can we get you a Bible that you understand? Because once they start reading, they're like, wow, like that resonates with me. That helps them to move from that exploring to the beginning, because now I want more. Now I'm getting excited about the word. And so the process has to be to get people through this process to mature, and then they're ready for leadership. We have too many people in leadership who are not mature disciples. They're still beginning, they're still growing, they're still figuring it out. So when people come to them with questions, they don't have the answers because they're still trying to figure it out for themselves. But when we have people who have matured, and that doesn't mean you have all the answers, but it does mean that you are committed to the work of ministry, that you've at least figured out some of the foundational stuff, because you can't teach what you don't know. You can't demonstrate what you're not doing. So once we have that, then we look at small group discipleship. So one of the things that has perplexed me for the longest is this whole growth of non-denominational churches. And so we have an Elevation Church here in Charlotte. And I was like, how is it that they use the same system that the Methodists have? And they're saying exponential growth, but we got this system and we get maybe one or two new people. It's the purpose of small group discipleship. For many of our churches, once you get a class leader or a small group leader, you go into that group and you stay for the rest of your life. And it's almost like bondage. That person has been instructed to lord over you, to make sure that you do what you're supposed to be doing, that you pay your money, but they're not in charge of your spiritual growth. So I propose to churches, look at your small group discipleship and make sure that, one, your small group leaders are mature disciples, and two, that they have a plan for the spiritual growth of the people who are under them. If their focus is on the spiritual growth of people, you don't have to check in to see if they paid their money. You don't have to check in to see if they attended service, because as they're growing spiritually, then they will want to do those things. And if you have 10 people in your group and you get 2 of them to mature discipleship, and then you send those 2 out to go start their own small group, not just to invite people to come to church, but for them to go and do the things that you taught them. As the Great Commission said, as you learn, you go teach others. Are we teaching people in such a way that we can send them out to replicate what we've taught them? So I propose, check in with them once a week. It could be on a Monday. And the question I like to ask is, what did you hear in the sermon yesterday? Because one, that's going to tell you, did they hear the sermon yesterday? And then 2, it gives them a space to wrestle with the word. Well, I heard this and I didn't quite understand, or I heard this and, I feel like God is saying that. That's when people start to grow, when they're able to talk through their faith. A lot of times we don't evangelize and we don't witness because we're not sure. I haven't heard myself say these things, so I'm not going to go tell somebody else who has questions and I don't even know. So through this change in mindset about how we do small group discipleship, growing people spiritually will help us to see that exponential growth, because then people will say, I want some of what you're getting. And then finally, because I do want to have time for a question and answer, I'm doing an internal assessment, looking at how many members you have in different age groups, looking at, your ratio of men to women, looking at what schools. I heard some of the churches say they're doing projects at schools. Are you doing projects at the schools that your members' children attend? Because too often we're asking our members for sacrificial offerings and sacrificial giving, and we're not even serving them. We have people in our congregations who are facing eviction, who don't have food in their refrigerator, but we want them to give food for other people. So we have to make sure that we're doing the work internally, that we are making sure that the people who are in our communities and congregations are served. Because let me tell you, when they're served, when we're doing ministry that meets the needs of the people that we have, you know what they do? They go tell other people like them. Then you don't have to do friendelism. This week, invite your friends. This week, invite your family. This week, invite your coworkers, because every week I'm inviting someone, because I want other people to get what I'm getting. And if people don't feel like they want to invite other people to get what they're getting, it might be because they're not happy with what they're getting. So this will lead you to your digital evangelism, figuring out, based on who you have, what platforms do you use? If your congregation is mostly older, then you probably don't need to be broadcasting and doing all this fancy stuff. Meet your people where they are. Serve them first, and then you can grow. So again, I want to open it up for our questions. And I know that was probably a lot of information, but.
Well, Reverend Womack.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. And we already see from the chat box that people want to know if we're recording this, and we are. And so thank you so much for your excellent presentation and these excellent seeds that you've planted for us to think about. And let me tell you all who are with us, if you have a question, let's send your question by one of us, by Reverend Richardson, by Reverend Steele, or to me, just to help keep down some of the traffic in the chat box. So please, you can ask your question, and in a moment, you can also ask it through your screen, and you can unmute yourself, or we'll unmute you. But before we go to particular questions, Reverend Womack, can you unpack a little bit this thing that we had the pleasure of talking about with the restaurant metaphor? Mm-hmm. That often in our churches, we want to invite people to come to us like a restaurant would invite people. Right. We want to kind of like give out coupons. Restaurants would do promos, buy one dinner, get one free. And they're trying to get you into the restaurant. But sometimes we're inviting people into our restaurant without the kind of thorough assessment of what do they meet when they come to us?
Right.
Are we friendly? What's on our menu, so to speak? How do we serve them? What will they eat? You know, what will be the appetizer? What will be the entree? What will be the dessert? Is a manner of speaking. And this relates to, I think, to this idea of ministry before membership, or discipleship before membership. That sometimes we want members without thinking about ministry, and that perhaps we should focus on ministry and then let membership develop out of our ministries. So the
Right.
restaurant metaphor, and then related to that, this ministry before membership thing.
Right. Well, I will say when I first started doing this work around 3 years ago, I've had my consulting firm for the past 15 years, working primarily with small business owners, nonprofits. And I had some ministry friends who were like, hey, can you do that thing that you do to grow businesses to help me grow my church? And I was like, of course. And I thought that it was going to be about branding and marketing and how do we get the message out. But the more congregations that I went into, the more I found that the issue was not with the messaging, but the issue was with the people who were already in the congregation, that they had members of a church, but not disciples of the kingdom. So people are very territorial, even from, where do I sit? Like, you can't sit in my seat. Who's over a program? I have to be over the program. And when I hear a lot of eyes, that tells me that there's a discipleship problem. Because when you've truly been discipled and you go to church, like, you want to be in the presence of God. You're not worried about what choir is singing. You don't care if the pastor can preach. I'm worshiping because of the goodness of God and everything that he's done in my life. I'm there to worship and to lay prostrate before the cross because I know that but for God would I even be here. But when people have not been discipled, then their reasoning for doing this work is for selfish gain. And so it is like with a restaurant, you can have the most beautiful establishment, you can have the best menus, which would be the programs, everything can look pristine, but if your customer service is off, if the waiter doesn't greet you, isn't friendly, if I'm coming because I want fried chicken and you bring me potato salad and rice to the table, if I'm not getting what you say you serve, then that's where the problem comes in. And that's why it's important to do that internal assessment to make sure that your leadership and that your members are being discipled. Because even if they're on the path, they're going to have the spirits of the fruits of the spirit. But when I go into churches and people are nasty and people have like all these issues, and a lot of times it's people who've been in the church for 30, 40 years, tenure does not equate to discipleship. You can be in the church for all your life, but if there has not been a change on the inside, you haven't been discipled. And so that's why we have to really do the work on the inside. If we're going to talk about thriving and growing and going forward, we have to do an assessment of where are we right now? Who do we have? What are we doing with those people? Because when we do the work with the people that we have, I promise you, they're going to go tell other people. I can't tell you how many churches have tried to recruit me because they love so much what they're doing. They're like, hey, I know you have a church, but come be a part of what we're doing, because they're that excited about what they're doing. If your members aren't that excited about what you're doing, then you really need to evaluate, are you meeting their needs first? Because it doesn't help to save the community, but then you don't even have people in your congregation to help you do the work.
Thank you. Reverend Womack, how about you stop sharing the screen and we can do gallery view so that we can see people, and we'll share her presentation with our subgroups and with anybody who wants it. We'll also share the recording. Thank you for those resources too.
Yep, so there'll be, there's some great articles by Barna that you all can read through and get some more information based on what we talked about. And then you did mention the Pastors Do More Than Preach virtual symposium. So you all will get a link for the event survey. So when you fill out the survey, then you'll get your link to get your free pass to that one-day workshop that's going to be next Friday. We have some phenomenal speakers that you definitely want to come and hear. So yes, we'll stop.
Thank you again. So if you have a question, go ahead. You can unmute yourself, and if you know how to wave your hand in Zoom, you can do that too. But feel free to ask questions. If you want to type your question and let somebody else ask it, you can send it to one of us. If you want to just speak up for yourself and ask your question, just unmute yourself and ask your question for Reverend Womack.
I have one question. LaKesha, is it possible we can clone you and bring you into our church to show us what we need to do? But no, I just wanted to commend you for doing a great job. I sometimes get concerned because as I look at some of, especially the non-denominational churches, they seem to be led by younger pastors. So I guess my question is, do you think younger people are more receptive of ministry coming from younger pastors? Maybe it's the language that's being spoken. I'm not sure what. I think that's my question.
So I don't think that it's about age, but I think it's about mindset. So the reason that a lot of people, not even just young people, but a lot of people are turned off by more traditional models of church because they follow more of a fixed mindset. So it's like, this is what we do. This is how we've done it. This is how we're always going to do it. And people are more attracted to growth mindsets. They want to be a part of a ministry that is expanding, that's doing new things. And the thing is, like, people don't care if you make mistakes. Like, you can do a ministry project and be like, you know what, this didn't work out so well. And as long as you're willing to grow and to learn from the experience, people aren't looking for perfection. Like, so often we think that it has to be perfect and everything has to be right, and we got to have like these great graphics. Like, I do my own graphics. I tell people they're not fancy, but you get the message. You see who, what, when, where, and why. But we put so much emphasis on production and staging and having the image that we have no substance. And that's what people are looking for. They want substance. So you can have an older pastor who is engaged and providing substance, and people will gravitate because he or she also has wisdom. Or you can have a young pastor who has energy and they're willing to try new things, and people are going to be attracted to that. People are attracted to what they aspire to. So if you don't have anything that's speaking to my future self and who I want to be, it doesn't matter what age you are. Because I know some pastors my age that have empty churches because they have a fixed mindset, because they're not willing to try anything new. They think that just because they're young in age that they're going to attract people, but they're not doing anything new. They're not growing anybody. So people still aren't coming. Is that?
Thank you.
For the churches that you have helped, what has been the timeline, at least for like the transformation toward discipleship, understanding those, fixed mindsets of the members that are there? About how long do you think it normally takes?
Honestly, it's different for every church. So typically, my work starts in maybe a group setting like this. And then a pastor will say, hey, like, I need you to come talk to my congregation. Because typically in these group settings, it's only the leadership. It's only the people who are really bought in. So you have to take, this group of people to go tell the rest of the congregation, hey, there's someone you really need to come in here, and this is what we're going to talk about. And then you get more people engaged. And then we have the conversation. And it's easier to have conversations about specific congregations when you're working within that local congregation. So as great as this is, the real work doesn't start until you're able to bring your community together and have some honest dialogue. Like, do we really want to grow? Because I tell some churches, like, y'all don't want to grow. Like, you're saying it, but the actions, the words coming out of your mouth and the actions do not speak to growth. So if you truly want to grow, are you willing to do the actions? Like I had one church say, how do we get more young men to come and be a part of our ministry? So I said, okay, so what do you have to offer young men? And they're like, nothing. And I said, well, they're not coming. If you want to attract people, you have to first think, what do I have to offer them? It's just like a restaurant, like Dr. Scrivener said, a restaurant saying, hey, we need more customers, but we don't have any food. What are they coming to? Like, you want them to just come and sit and look at you? Like, people aren't doing that because there are too many other options. So that's why it's good to do that internal assessment. Who do we already have? And then, so those 3 slides are part of my 9 strategies. So after you go through those first 3, the next is an external assessment. Who do you want to attract? Because too often we start looking outside. Who can we pull in? When what happens is you pull in a lot of people and they go right back out because you haven't done the work at home. You don't have a clean house and you inviting all these people in. And when they see how messy your house is, they're like, it was nice and I'll be over here. And they're gone and they're not coming back. And you don't really get a second chance because they still have that memory from their first impression of you. So that's why it's important for us to do that internal work. And then when people come in, they're like, oh, this is some good stuff. And again, they start inviting other people to come. But when they come in and they like, y'all messy. Like I went to one church, I promise, I preached to them and the pastor got up one of the trustee members got up and was like, y'all can come to the trustee meetings now because we don't fight the way we used to fight. I was like, wait, what? I said this like during service. And I was just like, what does that culture say? Not only to someone who's visiting, but to the members who are already there. And those are the things that we really have to think about. So for most churches, like I've worked with churches who, like I came in, they were like, all right, we'll call you back in a year. And they call me back in 4 months. I've worked with churches that said, hey, come in like once a quarter and let's do some leadership training. So it depends on the people. It depends on what they want.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have any, based on your assessments or interventions that you've implemented that are successful, any models or of that such?
So typically what we'll do is ask the congregation, what changes would you like to see in your congregation? And then place it in their hands to create the group. So if it's like, we want to see more outreach in our church, we want to see more inreach, we want to see more marketing, like really building groups within the church of people who are interested in doing that work. I think that the model that's most effective to get to that place is really helping people to understand where they are personally in the discipleship process and calling people to be honest with themselves. Like, where am I? Like, am I truly a mature disciple? Or am I still growing in this thing and making that okay? Like not demonizing people like, oh, you've been in the church too long to not be a mature disciple. Well, that's not really fair because if we haven't been providing the tools, then we can't have the expectation. So I think like really helping people to understand where they are and providing them the tools to grow. And then also like, I'm just honest with people. At some point, like we're going to meet God. Like, that's the goal. Like, that's why we do all of this. And from the scriptures that I've read, like, it's only two answers you're going to get. And it's either, well done, my good and faithful servant, or depart from me, I never knew you. And we've allowed too many of our members to just do religious activity, to just pay money, to just do the work that we want them to do, not for the glory of God. We haven't assessed what has God called you to do. Are you operating in your calling? And I don't ever want it to be on my hands that I use people to do something that God didn't call them to do, that I never provided them the opportunity to fulfill their personal calling. So when they meet God and he's like, well, I called you to do X, Y, and Z, but they've done everything but that because we never gave them space to do what God has called them to do because it didn't fit with what we wanted to do.
Thank you.
My question is somewhat similar to the last question in terms of the internal and external assessments. Do you have example of a church climate survey or some type of tool or instrument that you've used or recommended?
So I'm going to be completely transparent with you. Like, I don't do all of that. Like, honestly, I just have conversation with people because I think that so often, like, we get into doing these surveys and assessments, and then by the time they take the survey, then we got to analyze the results, and then and like that process can take a good, 2 or 3 months. When really all you have to do is talk to people. Like, what do you want? What do you want to see different? What can we do? And I think like that's where a lot of people get frustrated with the church, because we do like all of these surveys and analysis, but then they never see any results. Versus saying, let's just sit down and have a conversation. Like, this is our church. It's only 50 of us left. What is it that we're going to do? What do we want to do? And I promise you, like, maybe half will engage in that work. So work with that half of people. I've been in spaces where people have told me I'm wrong, I don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm okay with that. You don't have to be a part of the work that we're doing, but the church is going to move forward. We're going to move forward with these new ideas. We're going to try something different. And I promise you, when I come back for the follow-up visit, those people who were telling me how wrong I was and that I didn't know what I was talking about are now engaged in the work. Because we usually have 1 or 2 people that stop the whole program because they say they don't like it. They say they don't want to do it. And so we stop because of those 1 or 2 people, instead of saying, you know what, it's okay. It's okay that you're not on board. You don't have to, you go sit over there and we're going to be over here making, and when they start to see the changes, when they start to see the energy coming back into the church, they have 2 choices. They can stay over there or they can come be a part of what we're doing.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
We are.
Reverend Womack, another thing that I think is
Go ahead.
just as it's important to keep people engaged and make sure that they're walking in their God-blessed gift. It's important too. I know of incidents where people have been asked to take on roles in the church that they're not fitted for.
Mm-hmm.
And they will even say no, but people or the pastor will put them in those positions anyway.
Yeah.
And those situations sort of push people away too, because you casted them into a position that they don't feel comfortable in. And so what starts to happen is they stop showing up for church because they're not comfortable in that position or doing that duty. So I think it's important too, with pastors, if someone tells you no, that is not my gift, that is not my niche, listen, because you could very well be pushing that person away, by you trying to engage them, into an activity that, or a role that they don't feel that they fit in.
Exactly. And I tell people it's better to not have a department than to have the wrong person in charge of that department, because what you're going to end up with is chaos. And we serve a God of order. And that's why he gives each of us a calling. We each have our spiritual gifts because he's already preordained where he wants us to serve. But we have the free will to make choices whether or not we do what we've been called to do. And too often we find ourselves not operating where we're called to serve, and it doesn't work. Like, it's a struggle. Everything is hard. The people don't listen. Like, it's not work. And a lot of times, if we really take a look back and say, is this what I was called to do? Is this where I'm supposed to be? And we should all be praying for not only ourselves, but for everyone in our church to be in God's will, to be doing what God has called them to do. Because when we're all operating in our calling, we could have 10 different ministries. Everybody's doing their own thing. And can I tell you that, like, the people serving your ministry don't only have to be the people in your church? When I was the connectional chairperson for our young adult committee, we had 12 people. And their personalities range the spectrum from like super saved to like, I don't even know if you go to church for real. And what I did was, because I was like, y'all can't coexist, because then you're going to be calling me all the time with problems. So for each person, I assess, like, what is it that you're called to do? And I empower them to create ministry opportunities with other people like them. So if your thing is workforce development, then you go get your workforce development friends and y'all do ministry together. Don't call the other people on the steering committee because they're doing their own thing. So that also helped our ministry to grow exponentially, because it wasn't everybody having to group up and work together, but it was allowing people to go and build their own communities and to be empowered to do their own ministries. But too often we feel like we have to force the people to work together. And it's usually on stuff that, like, they really don't want to do, if they're honest. They're doing it because you're making them do it.
Reverend Womack, thank you so much for your intellect and education around this topic. This is Kelsey Wilson speaking to you. My question is in relation to mental health. What have been some of the healthy strategies you have seen between the bridge of faith and mental health in the Black churches moving forward?
I think offering a space for people to get assistance. I have a lot of friends who are mental health professionals, and they've had churches to call them in to do workshops and even to do some one-on-one counseling. A lot of them offer, discount rates for church members and just making it accessible to them. A lot of people don't know the entry point to getting mental health assistance. So it's like, oh, I got to go online and try to find somebody, and I don't know if I trust them. I don't know if they have a faith background. I don't know. So by bringing someone in to introduce them to the congregation similar to this, and then at the end they say, if you would like to speak with me one-on-one, then here's my contact information, here's the rate that I charge. And a lot of them, they'll charge like maybe $25 or $30 for an hour session. And for some people, like, that's a night of pizza that I can pay to get like my mental health together. I'll sacrifice a pizza for mental wellness. But a lot of times, like, people don't know, like, they think they can't afford it. They think they can't access it. So by us providing the resource for them, then I found that that's been very helpful. And a lot of pastors, like, I've recommended that they get some counseling just because of everything that they're carrying. And when they get that counseling, they become even bigger advocates for their congregations because they see how beneficial it is for their personal well-being.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We can see that this has been a blessing. It's been a source of encouragement and excellent information. And we're just getting started. We're just getting started. And so we are grateful again for you all's presence. We are thankful so much for Reverend Womack's availability and for her gifts and for her presentation to us. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we just thank God. I think for many of us, perhaps this grant came, this grant and this pandemic and all of these things may have all come together just in the nick of time for us to help us evaluate what we're doing in our churches and what we're doing in ministry. It's forcing us to do a lot of things, forced me to record some sermons and figure out YouTube. So all of these things that we are being forced to do, to learn some new lessons, to learn some new skills. And so this is something we'll be tackling. And this is what we're trying to do because we believe that God still wants to work through our churches. We don't believe that the time is up for God to work through our particular places. God can bless over there, that's fine, but God still has some work for us to do where we are. And I think all of us honestly believe that, and we want to figure out and discern what the Spirit is doing and how God can work through us. So I'm just delighted that you all have been with us. We thank Reverend Womack again. We thank Reverend Richardson and Reverend Steele. Our ministry group leaders, our denominational leaders will get the survey out to you, and we'll get the recordings and all of that. We'll distribute all of those things to you. And I just ask that you think about these things, pray about these things, be meditating on these things. And I think many points Reverend Womack made, but I think a key one is find that core of people who are ready to move. And you all figure out what God is calling you to move, and then let God take care of the rest. It doesn't always have to be 100%. It might be 75 or 60%, but start moving and start doing God's work. and then let God take care of the rest. Start doing what God has called you to do, or continue and figure out how to do it or redo it. So we just thank God for all of this. Brief word from Reverend Steele and Reverend Richardson. Anything you want to say before we, yes, Reverend Womack, go ahead.
I've got to head to California. I have a seminar with a group out there. So I'm going to say I will see you later. I want to say goodbye. And if you guys need me, you have the presentation, and it has like the hyperlinks to all of my social media or contact information. Don't ever hesitate to reach out. If you have a question, I'm definitely here to serve and to help in any way that I can. But thank you all so much for having me today. And I look forward to assisting in any way that I can with this project.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, any Reverend Steele, Reverend Richardson, any final words you all want to offer before we close today's meeting?
I would just like to say thanks to all of you who have come to be a part of this, the kickoff. You know, when you're planning something and you envision how you would like for it to be, Dr. Scribner and I gave thought to what we thought we needed to do to get started. And it looks just like this meeting looks. I think it has done, Joe, what we wanted it to do, correct? Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It really does. And so you always feel good when what you set out to do, you can say that you were successful with that. So I'm grateful, and we are really looking forward to where do we go from here. Joe, can we give them a ballpark and leaving when the next major gathering will be? What did we say, about halfway in? What did we say?
I think in about 2 or 3 months in terms of everybody.
Yes, yes.
So the next steps will be our subgroups and then our congregations. So think of this as concentric circles. This is the biggest circle. Then your denomination, then your congregation. Okay, and we have many things that overlap. And so this allows us to start big, go in, and then come back out. And several times we'll be big, then go denominational, then congregational. So we, and that way we encourage each other, we reinforce each other, we share ideas together. So so the next thing we'll do is that we'll meet as denominational subgroups, and that would be in the next month. AME Zion, AME, and Presbyterian. Okay. Reverend Richardson.
I guess I just echo what you and Reverend Steele have said. One thing does occur to me. I think that we may have had some leaders in on this Zoom for whom Dr. Womack's presentation wasn't necessarily new, but confirmation of the direction that some of our congregations have been moving into already individually. And the assurance that now we have a collection of congregations that are thinking through these things is a shot in the arm in terms of moving us forward with a greater level of confidence on how we identify the ways in which we need to change, and then we implement those changes. And I think that that restaurant analogy has a lot of currency. It really is going to enable a lot of us to move farther, faster. To be able to say, are we advertising that we're selling steak, and then people are coming in looking for seafood, and we're getting all confused and flummoxed. So thank everyone who has been on from all of our 3 cohorts, AME Zion, AME, and Presbyterian. Thank you for your sacrifice of time. And particularly for my AME folks, you'll hear from me within the next 48 hours as to when we'll come together as a denominational subgroup. And I want to make sure that we continue to strike while the iron is hot, while the information is fresh, so that we can, take advantage of all the momentum that has been generated from this first meeting. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Well, let's end with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you. Lord, your grace and your mercy and your compassion are amazing. You bestow and shower upon us new mercies every day. We thank you for the blessing of this grant. We thank you for the Lilly Endowment and their focus on our churches. And we thank you for the work that lies ahead of us. We thank you for the desire to do that. And we ask that you would continue to be with us. Let us seek the Spirit's leading, give us discernment, encouragement, and endurance. Help us to be the people that you have called us to be in each particular place where we are located. We thank you again for your blessings and ask your blessings on us as we prepare to worship in various ways tomorrow. We ask that you be praised and that all glory be given to you. We ask that you would do all of these things for your own sake, and it is in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you again, and we'll be following up with this information with the recording, PowerPoint slides, and next meeting details and so forth. So thank you all again, and have a great great Saturday afternoon. Thank you.